Ever since I got the Contax CGCM oscilloscope camera, I fancied trying one of the more standard models from that period. I kept my eye open for a 137, and while I found plenty of the MD version, not many MAs appeared at the right price, and that was the version that I desired. Then I saw this 139 on a stall. The battery hatch was severely corroded, so the camera couldn't be tested, but the stall holder was realistic with their price, so I ended up buying the thing. Once I was back home, I did a temporary fix using some copper slug tape over the corroded battery terminal, popped in a fresh pair of batteries, and nothing happened. The shutter wouldn't fire at all. I double-checked that the batteries were actually making contact and generally fiddled around with it for about 10 minutes until all of a sudden the camera fired. Just once, then it returned to its previous state. After a bit more fiddling, the camera started firing occasionally, and then eventually almost every time. I figured it was probably the shutter release magnet that was sticking. Not a particularly unusual problem on old cameras with electronic shutter release. Once I'd left the camera alone for a few hours, it again took many presses of the shutter button before it would fire a shot, so definitely not a camera to simply bung a roll of film in and hope for the best. By the time the 139 was in production, the Contax cameras were being made by Yashica. I've already done a video looking at my Yashica FR1, link in the description. The Contax models had more features and were theoretically better quality, but both ranges were quite nice cameras and shared certain features like the electronic shutter release and so on. Anyway, I'll skip back in time now to when I first got the camera on the workbench. If I advance the film and press the shutter button, nothing happens. And if I try again, this time it does fire, and now it's freed off, it keeps on firing. On other occasions it can take a minute or so before it'll actually work. If I leave it for several days, it's usually more of a problem. The other thing I noticed is that when you press the shutter button having not advanced the shutter, the exposure meter illuminates, like this. Or not like this, because now the thing decides to play up, and I can click away like a crazy thing until the LEDs eventually jitter into life. If I advance the film and try to take a shot, it only fires on the third attempt, so it could be as simple as the shutter button contacts being dirty. That was definitely a problem with several of the switches on the CGCM when I first took that one apart. Other things that need sorting are a very dirty viewfinder, the obligatory light seals and mirror bumper, and there's also a bit of a squeak when I advance the film sometimes, so I'll start off by removing the top cover. I won't necessarily do a full strip down unless I really need to, and as always, this isn't a how-to video, it's just for general interest. There's a rubber cover over the screw securing the film advancing lever. The screw is a left-hand thread, which is always fun to find if you're not expecting it. Then beneath the lever is a spring plate, which can be lifted a little to release the preload before unhooking the spring. There was a bit less than half a turn of preload on this one. There's a lock ring to undo with a lens wrench or similar, normal right-hand thread this time. And the spring may as well come out now too, noting that the fixed end points outwards whereas the moving end just hooks back on itself. The rewind crank is pretty standard stuff. Open the back of the camera, carefully stop the drive dog from turning by putting the shaft of a screwdriver between the prongs, and turn the knob anti-clockwise to unscrew it from the shaft. There's a little washer beneath the rewind crank, so I'll just put that to one side. Before carrying on, I usually set the dials to a known setting and make a note of those settings. I usually go for bulb, minimum film speed, which in this case is 12 ISO, and 1 times on the exposure compensation. That way, as soon as I get the cover off, I can photograph the various cams beneath, should I need to refer to them later for reassembly. This step usually isn't required on modern cameras like this, but I still do it anyway. The shutter button unscrews with the help of a bit of rubber to grip onto it. I always keep various thicknesses of rubber in stock. It's great for making all sorts of seals and friction tools. And with the shutter button out of the way, the entire film speed ring just lifts off. Next, there are 3 screws securing the shutter speed ring with a black aluminium disc that sits in the centre. Then I've marked the brass ring beneath to identify the bulb position. There's a trim ring round the remote shutter release socket. Again, some rubber for friction will help get this out. And lastly, there are 5 screws, 1 on each side of the viewfinder eyepiece, 1 just in front of the shutter speed dial, and a pair of slightly longer screws either side of the lens mount. And with all that, I can carefully ease the top cover off, revealing all of the goodness beneath. So now I'll go away and think about what I'm going to do next. I'll probably investigate the shutter button contacts first, but I might yet change my mind. Okay, I've fired the shutter many times with the top off. It's still set to bulb, and on some occasions the shutter is opening, then closing straight away, while other times it remains open while the button is pressed. So there's almost definitely a problem with dirty contacts on the shutter button. Additionally, the retard gears for the mirror sound dry and squeaky, so those will need some attention too. So it looks like I will be doing a full strip down. I've already peeled off the leatherette and removed the bottom cover, and now there are 2 screws holding the lower nose trim, or at least there should be 2 screws, but one of them is missing. Then the trim can be gently eased off towards the bottom of the camera. There's 4 pretty obvious screws to remove the right hand front panel, right hand as you look at the front of the camera, that is. There was quite a bit of corrosion on the top right screw, probably from years of a user's sweaty hands gripping the camera. Then there are 3 screws securing the other front plate containing the exposure lock lever and self-timer. As on the other side, the smaller of the 3 down here was badly corroded and took quite a bit of effort with the correct screwdriver to get it moving. The plate can then lift off. There's only 1 mechanical connection, the rest is just a load of electrical connections on this plate. I might even have fairly good access to the mirror gears here, so perhaps I won't need to strip the camera completely. I'll have a little look and then return in a moment. Right, before I charge on too much further, I'll actually take heed of what the service manual says, and the first item on the shutter not firing list is this 100 microfarad tantalum capacitor here. So I'll pop that out and measure it, replacing it if it's way out of spec, to see if that sorts the shutter button issue. As always working on electronic stuff, I'll wear an anti-static strap to reduce the risk of inadvertently zapping one of the chips. And the capacitor is a bit off its specified value, but I don't think it's the cause of the non-firing issue. Everything I've observed points towards dirty switch contacts, so I'll pop the capacitor back in and carry on as before. Okay, it's now a few days later and I've skipped ahead a little bit, removing the counter and its base plate. I've unsoldered the green wire for the cable release socket and these 3 wires. The brown went to one of the hot shoe contacts, with the other 2 going to the section of PCB in front of the prism. There's also the linkages from the ISO dial that needed to come off, the pivot post for the front one also being one of the securing screws for the ISO base plate. That now allows me to remove the base plate to access the shutter button switch. Ideally I need to free that PCB from the flexible PCB, which involves unsoldering the 4 connections on top and another 4 on the underside leading to the contacts for the exposure lock and self-timer module. I don't particularly like working with flexible PCBs, so I'll ponder that for a little bit first. As a bit more of a test before I take the switch off, the pale green wire that went to the same track as the remote release socket is of course the wire from the shutter button, and with that unsoldered I can test the shutter button in isolation. And as expected, the resistance is all over the place. Sometimes it partially works, while other times there's no continuity at all. Just to add to my woes, we're in the middle of a power cut, so my lighting and soldering iron are all running from a power bank at the moment, so it's a good job I'm not doing a live audio, or all you'd hear would be the drone from the fan on my power bank. After looking again, the bracket holding the 4 contacts for the exposure lock module is easy to remove with a single screw, so I didn't need to unsolder that. I can then get to the screws securing the shutter button switch without unsoldering the upper connections. There's a metal spacer beneath the unsupported end of the switch PCB, and if I lift off the metal plate and the PCB, I can see that the contacts don't exactly look filthy, although the outer ring is quite grubby, and that's the non-moving contact, so it won't clean itself much by repeated use of the switch. So I'll get those cleaned up, reassembled and tested before progressing on to the next stage. And for a final sanity check after cleaning and reassembling the switch, it now works perfectly every time, so that part is now sorted. Fundamentally the camera is now fixed, but the optics are still very dirty, so I need to get the rest of the flexible PCB off in order to clean the prism and viewfinder. Plus I still need to attend to some of the dry bearings in the camera. I've now removed the viewfinder eyepiece cover and the viewfinder eyepiece itself, which allows me to ease the flexible PCB out of the way. The prism is held in place by a spring clip on each side. I'll need to replace the light seal at the rear of the prism because that's dropping debris all over the place. So if I remove the easy to get at spring clip, and then the not so easy to get at spring clip, I can then lift off the top clamp plate and protective cover. There's some sort of rubber compound sticking the prism into its holder. This might be some form of light seal to prevent light creeping round the sides of the prism, but it's probably just an anti-rattle compound, so I'm going to proceed with some care at this stage. But there she comes anyway. Well, that's the prism and viewfinder cleaned. It was all in a bit of a mess, both from decomposed light seal foam, and I suspect that some moisture had made its way in there because the viewfinder mask had what looked like liquid deposits all over it. I think I can do all the lubrication that I need to do without removing the mirror box, so I'll do that and reassemble the camera enough that I can test it. And here it is, back together enough to try it out, and the shutter is firing perfectly every time. I can hold the shutter open on bulb and it doesn't glitch at all. So the next thing to do is to replace the mirror bumper, clean the debris out of the mirror box area, then replace the light seals before reassembling the camera for some final testing. Ta-da! One fully reassembled camera. Everything is working as it should do. In fact, the shutter speeds are very accurate. That's the benefit of electronic shutter timing, which, when it's working correctly, can be a bit more consistent than some of the mechanically timed cameras. I don't have a massive collection of lenses in Contax Yashica bayonet, and certainly not any of the offerings from Zeiss, but I have a couple of Yashica primes, plus a Sigma 24mm, along with any of my Tamron Adaptor lenses, so that should do for the time being. I might retrim the camera at some point, or maybe I'll just leave it with the remains of the original covering, which has lost its outer surface, as tends to be the case with Contax cameras from this period. Overall, that wasn't too tricky a repair. Everything is modular, and with the electronic control there are less in the way of complicated linkages to deal with. I'm sure someone will pipe up with, why didn't I just spray deoxit or a similar product onto the shutter button switch? There are multiple reasons why I didn't do that. Certain plastics don't respond well to switch cleaners like deoxit and Servisol. I've only had it happen once, but the entire switch casing just fell apart when the cleaner soaked in. Not something I wanted to happen on this camera. Also, if any of the spray strayed into other parts, such as onto the focusing screen, it would have marked it permanently. And lastly, I needed to peel back the PCB in order to get the prism out for cleaning, so I was going to be removing the switch from the chassis anyway. I may still carry on with the CGCM project one day, but having the 139 scratches the Contax itch, and I might just keep the CGCM as an interesting display item. I think that probably covers it for now. All that's left is to head out and shoot some film in the 139, something I'll probably do over the next couple of weeks. If you've enjoyed watching, please like the video and maybe even subscribe to the channel, not forgetting to click on the bell icon so you get notifications when new videos are released. That's it for now, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a future video.